Okay, so let me just do a quick review of where we've been. We've observed that there was a revolution in our thinking about how things move, our meaning, our understanding as a humanity, understanding how things move, moving from Aristotle's idea that an object on Earth wants to come to rest, and then Aristotle found himself struggling with explaining what was going on in space with celestial bodies. And moving from that idea on via Galileo to Newton, who came up with some laws describing the motion of objects such that he could say an object that has a given velocity will continue to have that velocity unless some net force acts on it. The acceleration, the change in velocity, is going to be equal to the force divided by something we call mass, which is mathematically really just a way of relating the force on an object to the acceleration that results from it. We've looked at objects that are falling under the force of gravity. We've looked at objects that are sliding on horizontal surfaces with and without friction. We've seen where friction comes from. We've looked at objects after looking at falling objects, which is simply a very vertical ramp. We've looked at ramps at more gentle angles and seen how they behave as they slide down them with or without friction. Finally, we looked at objects being spun about some center and observed that not only can we model swinging an object around some center by a string as a series of linear motions, but we can also model any solid object which is rotating about an axis that is central to it as a series of masses that are can be thought of as held towards the center by forces that are effectively centripetal. So we've unified all of the motions that we see things go through, both linear translational motion, spinning things about as if on a string, and spinning things about, rotating them about a central axis, all through one set of laws. So now I'd like to move on to a different idea, which is a way of thinking about the way objects are moving and how they tend to remain in motion, but something special happens when they hit a second object, when they come into collision. In order to build up how to think about that, I'm going to invite you to watch this video here. If you pull up the file on Canvas, you'll find you can click that. What you'll see in that video, cue it up at 0.42, otherwise you've got some uninteresting conversation beforehand. You'll see a man with a very, very big sniper rifle. And the man fires his sniper rifle, and you'll find that even though he's a normal-sized man lying on the ground in the dirt, he is pushed abruptly backward when this uber big sniper rifle fires its bullet. Prior to the firing, we had a man, there he is, and his gun, kind of like a boy and his dog, but a little sicker. And inside the gun, somewhere inside the gun, is a bullet. This is the before. Afterward, oh, and the center of mass of this system is perhaps here. I'm probably making that up. It's probably much further towards this guy's butt. Anyways, the center of mass of the system can't move. It can't move because there is no external force coming in, finger of God or whatever, pushing on the center of mass of this system. So the center of mass of the system that I've drawn in a pink line stays exactly where it is. After the gunshot, man and gun there's gun, there's man, have slid backwards against the force of friction, in fact, and bullet is headed off that way. If these guys were on a frictionless surface, they would continue sliding back in that direction, but they can't continue because they're decelerated by the friction force between him and the ground. The bullet goes off that way. Because there is no net force on the center of mass of the system, the momentum of the system cannot change. Now, the mass of the system isn't going to change. We're talking about essentially the velocity of the system. We define momentum. Does that show up there very easily? I'm not sure it does. Let me do that in a darker color. The momentum of a system is defined using the letter P to symbolize it as the mass times the velocity. This is going to be unchanging for a system that does not have a net force on its center of mass. Now, obviously, the bullet went from velocity equals 0 to velocity equals something that way, and the man in the gun went from velocity equals 0 to velocity equals something that way. Even though the system itself cannot have its momentum change, the components of the system can have their individual momenta change as long as their vector sum adds up to 0. Notice that velocity is a vector, momentum is therefore a vector. In this case, you have a small mass and a very large velocity. In the positive direction, you have a large mass and a correspondingly small velocity. In the negative direction, their vector sum adds to 0, must add to 0, and therefore we talk about this by saying that momentum is conserved. In some ways, we can think about this as coming about from Newton's third law, which we haven't really talked much about, except to say that anytime an object comes into interaction with a second object and puts a force on that second object, the second object puts a force back on the first one. I'm going to tie some math to that. Let's think about, for now, let me actually cover some of that up. There we go. Let's think about, for now, a 20 kilogram object. Don't think about it as rolling or sliding. Think about it as sliding with no friction. I put a 20 Newton force on my 20 kilogram object, and I expect a 1 meter per second squared acceleration out of that interaction. This 20 kilogram object is a system. And it doesn't matter what's happening inside this system. We're used to thinking about this as one 20 kilogram object, but if you really think about it, you realize that that one 20 kilogram object is made up of a bajillion individual atoms with their own very small masses. So I'm not going to break it into a zillion or a bajillion objects. I'm just going to break this system into two. Now it's 5 and 15. Still add up to 20 kilograms, everything's good. I put a 20 Newton force on this now box containing these two masses and find that the box accelerates to one side at 1 meters per second squared as expected. But then I start focusing on the individual components because I'm not applying my 20 Newton force to both of these objects. I'm applying it to that object. When I apply the 20 Newton force to the 5 kilogram object, as here, that's the one I'm in contact with, then I would expect that 5 kilogram object to accelerate at 4 meters per second squared. But it doesn't. We saw above. It ends up only accelerating at 1 meter per second squared. The only way we can understand this and stay consistent with Newton's laws framing previous to this is to say that there must be a net force of only 5 newtons on this ball. We're putting a 20 Newton force this direction. We infer from the observed acceleration that there is only a 5 Newton net force, so we infer a 15 Newton force coming this way on this ball. Where can that force be coming from? Well, it can only be coming from the other object that's in contact with the ball, which is this 15 kilogram ball. We can also consider the 15 kilogram ball. If 20 newtons of force were acting on it, then it should accelerate at 1.3 meters per second squared, but it doesn't. So we infer that the net force on this 15 kilogram ball is actually only 15 Newton. Why is that? Well, clearly there must be a 5 Newton force acting opposing its motion.